So imagine just for a moment being Meghan Markle right now. Picture her sitting in a sunlit living room in Montecito, scrolling through headlines that refuse to fade. A story she thought was safely tucked away is clawing its way back to the surface, piece by piece. And no amount of curated interviews, polished Instagram posts, or carefully worded statements can fully smother it this time. You have to wonder what's going through her mind. Is it panic? Or is it calculation? Figuring out which journalist to call, which outlet to charm, how to spin something this big without sounding desperate. Because this isn't just some petty rumor about a family feud or a frosty glance at an event. This is a direct contradiction of the single most important event in her life as a royal, the birth of her son. And if that story collapses, everything else she's built starts to look like a house of cards. For someone who's spent years perfecting the art of narrative control, this is the one chapter she may not be able to edit. But to understand why this moment is hitting so hard, you have to go back to when the picture-perfect version of Archie's birth was first presented to the world. On the surface, it looked exactly as it was supposed to. Soft smiles, a swaddled baby, two glowing parents basking in royal parenthood. Press releases were tidy, the photos carefully framed. There was no footage of Meghan in a hospital gown, no glimpse of a sterile corridor, not even a snapshot of her being whisked away in a car toward a delivery suite. But most people didn't think twice. After all, not every birth needs to be a spectacle. Maybe people thought she just wanted privacy. Maybe she deserved it. And yet even then, small details felt off. Timeline never quite lined up. Palace first announced Meghan was in labor, only to declare hours later that Archie had already arrived. How does that happen? How does the world's most scrutinized family, with a media machine trained to control the flow of information down to the minute, make a mistake that glaring? The simple answer is they don't. And that's where the first cracks began to show, till most shrugged it off. The photos that came next were too perfect to question. Meghan looked radiant, with fresh makeup and glossy hair. She wasn't flushed or fatigued, the way any mother would be mere hours after giving birth. No swelling, no exhaustion, no visible discomfort. Just a serene smile, as though she'd floated effortlessly into motherhood. At the time, it was easy to say she was just lucky that her glam team worked fast. But now, with new evidence surfacing, those photos don't look like luck anymore. They look like part of a larger production. Because here's the revelation that changed everything. The very hospital Meghan claimed to have delivered in, the place her team insisted she used, has come forward saying they have no record of her ever being there. No sign-ins, no security footage, no medical documentation. Nothing. It's as if she simply never crossed the threshold. And this isn't an anonymous tip or a speculative blog post. It's coming directly from the institution itself, a hospital bound by protocol and record-keeping, a place where every royal birth, every celebrity delivery leaves a paper trail. But for Meghan, that trail is empty. Imagine what that moment must have felt like when her team realized the story wasn't going to stay buried. Panic of knowing that an official source, one you can't control with NDAs or defamation threats, was contradicting you outright. It's the kind of revelation that doesn't just spark gossip. It calls the entire narrative into question. Because if Meghan wasn't there, where was she? And why claim she was? That's the question everyone's asking now. And the possible answers are not flattering. Some believe she chose to have a home birth, something not unprecedented but certainly unusual for a royal. Others suspect she delivered in a private facility so exclusive it doesn't publicly confirm any patient. But the theory that's gained the most traction, the one that was once dismissed as too scandalous to consider, is that Meghan may never have been pregnant at all. That Archie's arrival was orchestrated through a surrogate, hidden behind a facade of baby bumps, maternity shoots, and glowing interviews. Sounds outrageous until you look at the footage. Videos that were once shrugged off as bad angles have resurfaced, dissected frame by frame. In one clip, Meghan's belly appears high and rounded. In the next, it shifts lower, flatter, almost deflated. And in the most infamous clip, her bump folds sharply as she bends to sit, creating a shape no human abdomen should make. Back then, her defenders waved it away as a trick of the camera or an unfortunate wardrobe choice. But seen now, alongside the missing hospital records, those moments feel a lot more like evidence. And here's where the silence becomes deafening. Because Meghan's team, usually quick to push back on any narrative that doesn't align with their version of events, has said nothing. No statements, no clarifications, Not even the usual appeals to privacy. Just a blank space where the truth should be. If you've followed Meghan's pattern of public relations, you know this isn't an accident. Silence is often her first move. She waits for the outrage to crest and fade, hoping that by the time she speaks, people will be too fatigued to care. But this time, the story isn't fading. It's growing, feeding on every unanswered question. And it's not just the public asking those questions. Insiders close to the palace have started leaking fragments of conversations that took place behind closed doors. Apparently, even the royal family was puzzled by the secrecy. There were discussions, tense, hushed discussions, about whether Meghan was using a surrogate. Not because it's a scandal to do so. Plenty of women have, and no one faults them. But because pretending otherwise, staging an entire pregnancy for the cameras, crosses a line from private choice into public deception. Consider the difference between Meghan and her predecessors. When Princess Diana stepped out of St. Mary's Hospital with baby William in her arms, it was a moment of collective celebration. The same was true when Kate Middleton appeared on those same steps with George, Charlotte, and Louis. There were cameras. There were crowds. There was proof, visible, undeniable proof, of a royal birth. Meghan and Harry chose something different. No hospital exit, no documented arrival, no evidence at all. Just a vague announcement and a handful of polished photographs. Different isn't inherently suspicious, but in the absence of any confirmation, it starts to look like deliberate concealment. What's remarkable is how quickly the conversation has shifted. What began as a fringe theory is now front-page news. Social media is exploding with side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's bump from one event to the next. Analysts are combing through video footage, studying the folds of fabric, the placement of her hands, the way her silhouette changes when she moves. And as uncomfortable as it is to watch a woman's body scrutinized to this degree, the reality is Meghan invited that scrutiny by refusing to offer any transparency. And then there's the legal dimension, the part no one wants to talk about but everyone is thinking. If Archie wasn't born of Meghan's body, if the official records were falsified or omitted, what does that mean for his standing in the royal line? Succession isn't just a ceremonial detail. It's a constitutional matter, governed by centuries of precedent and laws that leave little room for ambiguity. Every heir to the throne must be born of the body of their mother, in a documented birth, witnessed and recorded. That chain of evidence is broken, so is the legitimacy of the claim. Imagine for a moment the palace's dilemma. Do they confront Meghan and risk a scandal that could eclipse even Harry's tell-all interviews? Or do they stay silent, hoping the public will eventually move on? So far, they've chosen silence. But as the headlines pile up, as more footage resurfaces and more insiders speak out, that silence looks less like diplomacy and more like complicity. Meanwhile, Meghan is undoubtedly preparing her next move. Maybe she's working on a carefully crafted statement that will frame the narrative as an attack on her motherhood. Maybe she'll sit down with a sympathetic interviewer, someone willing to ask only the gentlest of questions while she dabs at her eyes and insists she's the real victim here. It wouldn't be the first time, but this time the evidence isn't just whispers and speculation. It's institutional records, or the lack thereof. And no amount of soft lighting or curated soundbites can erase that. For Harry, the stakes are equally high. He's spent years defending Meghan against every accusation, every negative headline. He's framed it all as a campaign of harassment, an extension of the cruelty his mother endured. But what if this time the critics are right? What if the story he's been repeating, the one about privacy and protection, wasn't the full truth? If he knew about a surrogate and went along with the deception, it undermines everything he's claimed about authenticity and integrity. If he didn't know, it suggests he's been manipulated by the person he trusts most. Either way, the damage is done. The foundation of their public image, a story of escape from oppression, of honesty in the face of a cold institution, is cracking. And as the cracks spread, every other narrative they've offered begins to look suspect. Was the Oprah interview as spontaneous as it seemed? Were the claims of mental anguish genuine, or a prelude to a broader strategy to control the narrative? When the most basic detail of your story, your own child's birth, turns out to be unverifiable, it casts a shadow over everything else. What's truly tragic is that at the heart of all this speculation is a child. Archie didn't ask to be born into a dynasty or to become a symbol in his parents' battle with the monarchy. He didn't choose to have his existence dissected on talk shows and tabloid covers. But when you build an empire on the appearance of truth, and that truth is revealed to be negotiable, you leave your children exposed in ways they'll never fully escape. The public isn't done asking questions. They want to know why there were no hospital photos, why the timeline shifted so abruptly, why a hospital with decades of precise record-keeping has nothing to show for Meghan's stay, and perhaps most importantly, why she's chosen silence over clarity. Every day that passes without answers fuels the perception that this was all a carefully managed illusion. And illusions, no matter how beautifully crafted, eventually shatter. If Meghan hopes to preserve any shred of credibility, she'll need to do more than release a statement blaming the media for their unfair scrutiny. She'll need to provide evidence, real, verifiable evidence, that Archie was born as she claimed. Because without it, every future endeavor, every charitable initiative, every public appearance will be haunted by the same unspoken question. If you lied about this, what else have you lied about? In the end, the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how many NDAs are signed or how many interviews are staged. And when it does, the consequences are rarely confined to the people who tried to bury it. The monarchy, for all its flaws and outdated traditions, depends on a single fragile currency: public trust. This story proves to be as hollow as it appears. That trust won't just erode, it will collapse. And the fallout will reach further than anyone, even Meghan, could have imagined. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do isn't telling a lie. It's building your entire identity on a story you know won't hold up to scrutiny. And when that story falls apart, it takes everything else down with it. But even as the questions multiply, there's another layer of this saga that's harder to untangle, and that's Meghan's unshakable confidence. For all the speculation, she has rarely looked rattled. Think back to every public appearance she's made since stepping down as a working royal. Every speech, every podcast, every red carpet moment. There's an undeniable sense that she believes she's in control of her story, that the public will eventually come around to her side if she simply waits long enough and repeats her truth often enough. This is what makes the current controversy so different from every previous headline. It's not about whether she was bullied by Palisades. It's not about whether she and Kate Middleton exchanged icy glances or snippy remarks. This isn't even about media bias or the tabloid industry's relentless appetite for scandal. This is about something more tangible, documentation, or rather the glaring absence of it. And no amount of smooth delivery or PR finesse can erase the fact that a hospital's record books don't list her name. That's why some royal watchers have started describing this as the story Meghan can't spin. 'Cause you can argue over the tone of an article or the intention behind a headline, but you can't argue away a missing record. It's binary. Either you were there or you weren't. Either you signed the admission forms or you didn't. And so far, the only evidence we have suggests she didn't. Naturally, her most loyal defenders see this as yet another example of the world picking Meghan apart in a way no other royal would ever be scrutinized. They insist this is all motivated by bias, by jealousy, by an unwillingness to accept an outsider in the royal fold. And to be fair, there is an undercurrent of that in how Meghan has been covered. But it's also true that when you position yourself as a champion of honesty and transparency, when you make your personal story the bedrock of your brand, you're inviting people to measure your claims against the facts. And in this case, the facts don't seem to be on Meghan's side. It's worth remembering that the monarchy has always depended on a delicate balance between spectacle and accountability. Yes, royal births are grand events, complete with flashing cameras and historic hospitals, but they're also moments of verification, of proof. In the centuries before DNA tests and modern medicine, the spectacle itself, the midwives, the attending physicians, the crowds outside, was partly about reassuring the nation that the heir was legitimate. Even in the 21st century, with its more relaxed attitudes and less rigid protocols, the principle remains the same. You show up, you show the baby, you sign the papers. It's a ritual as old as the crown itself, a way of saying to the public, this child is who we say he is. Meghan and Harry's decision to skip that ritual was never going to be without consequence. First, it looked like a bold rejection of stuffy convention, the kind of modernizing move that would define their time as trailblazers. But in hindsight, it feels less like progress and more like a gamble. one that relied on people never asking too many questions. And to understand how this gamble might have seemed worth it to them, you have to look at how obsessed modern culture has become with controlling the narrative. Think about the way celebrities handle big life moments now. Birth announcements timed to social media drops, carefully curated photo shoots, exclusive interviews with hand-picked outlets. Meghan, with her background in Hollywood and her understanding of image-making, was uniquely prepared to do the same. But while that strategy might work for a movie star or an influencer, it doesn't translate easily to royalty, an institution where every detail, from a baby's name to their first blanket, is part of the public record. What's fascinating is how much of this story hinges on moments that, at the time, seemed almost insignificant. The absence of a photo here, the vagueness of a statement there. Little things that didn't stand out until someone began piecing them together. That's the danger of retroactive scrutiny. Once the seed of doubt is planted, every detail starts to look suspicious. Consider the birth certificate. When it was finally released, it was celebrated as proof that everything was above board. But even then, people noticed the oddities. The omission of a hospital name, the lack of any publicly named medical professional, the formality of Meghan's title, Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness, without the accompanying details that traditionally lend credibility to the record. Some observers said it was just an oversight, an effort to protect privacy, but others saw it as a deliberate attempt to create an official document without providing any real clarity. And then there's the question of why the palace, which is usually so meticulous about protocol, allowed this to happen. Some insiders say the Queen herself was frustrated by the lack of transparency but felt it was better to let Meghan and Harry handle the matter privately rather than ignite a public confrontation. Others believe the palace was blindsided, forced to accept Meghan's version of events because they simply had no way to prove otherwise. Either way, the decision to look the other way has aged poorly. Every day the palace stays silent, they look complicit in whatever deception may have taken place. Meanwhile, the public's patience is wearing thin. Social media is no longer content to speculate quietly in comment sections. Influencers and commentators with massive followings are picking up the story, posting side-by-side video clips, quoting the hospital's statement, and asking why the mainstream press seems reluctant to dig deeper. Even people who were once sympathetic to Meghan's cause are starting to admit that something about this story doesn't add up. And you have to ask yourself, if this were any other member of the royal family, would the same allowances be made? Would a missing paper trail be dismissed as an innocent oversight? Or would it be treated as the potential scandal it is? Some say Meghan is being held to an unfair standard, but others argue that this is precisely what equality looks like. No special treatment, no exceptions, just the same expectation of honesty that applies to everyone else. At the center of it all is a question that's almost too big to fully process. What happens if the truth comes out? If it's proven beyond doubt that Meghan didn't give birth to Archie herself, the consequences won't be limited to hurt feelings or PR headaches. The line of succession itself could be thrown into chaos. Questions would be raised about Archie's titles, his rights, even his citizenship status. Sounds dramatic, but these are the kinds of constitutional dominoes that can start falling when a royal birth is called into question. And yet, in the midst of all this, Meghan remains silent. No interviews, no statements, no attempts to rebut the hospital's claims. Some see this as strategic, an effort to starve the story of oxygen by refusing to engage. Others believe it's a sign that she doesn't have a credible explanation to offer. Either way, the silence has become its own form of communication, sending the message that she's either unwilling or unable to provide the clarity the public demands. What's remarkable is how this scandal has eclipsed every other controversy Meghan and Harry have faced. The Oprah interview, the Spotify deal imploding, the Netflix docuseries. All of it now feels secondary to the question of whether the most basic detail of Archie's life, his very arrival in the world, was misrepresented. It's not just the UK press driving the conversation anymore. Outlets in the US, Canada, and Australia are picking up the story, interviewing experts on royal protocol, and publishing timelines that lay out every discrepancy in painstaking detail. This isn't a niche obsession anymore. It's a mainstream conversation, one that Meghan and Harry are rapidly losing control over. And as the public digs deeper, other questions inevitably resurface. If Meghan was willing to present a version of events that may not be true about something as significant as her child's birth, what else has she been willing to bend? Did she really feel silenced by the royal family, or was that a narrative crafted to justify her exit? Were the mental health struggles she described in her interviews genuine, or were they part of a broader strategy to gain sympathy? These are uncomfortable questions, but once trust is broken, every claim starts to look suspicious. Some observers believe this is the point of no return for Meghan's public image. That no matter how compelling her future projects may be, no matter how polished her next interview looks, this scandal will always be lurking in the background. Others think she can still recover, that a single well-timed confession, an acknowledgement that she used a surrogate out of medical necessity, might be enough to salvage some goodwill. But even if that's true, it's hard to imagine a version of this story that doesn't end with a permanent loss of credibility. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one birth or one family. It's about what happens when the truth becomes negotiable, when public figures decide that their version of reality is the only one that matters. In an age where image is everything, it's a cautionary tale about the risks of believing your own PR. And as much as Meghan might wish this would all blow over, the reality is that it won't. Not while there are unanswered questions. Not while the public feels they've been misled, and not while every silence is interpreted as an admission of guilt. For Meghan, the road ahead is likely to be more challenging than anything she's faced before. Because this time, the stakes aren't just personal, they're constitutional. This time, it's not just her reputation on the line, it's the legitimacy of her child's place in a centuries-old institution. And that's a story no amount of strategic silence can make disappear.